My name is Sandy McKenna, and this is Unforgettable Conversations, the podcast that is your roadmap to resilience, sharing extraordinary stories from people just like you and me who have weathered life's storms. You'll find inspiration and motivation in every episode. I've been fascinated by the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial. I've been watching live feeds every day on Emily D. Baker's YouTube channel. She's a lawyer and she's a legal commentator. She provides in-depth commentary, and she explains the law. This trial has been filled with enough sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It's surely going to end up as a Netflix blockbuster. But I wondered, how did they get to this point? Whatever possessed them to air all of their dirty laundry for the world to see, comment on, and draw conclusions about? My guest today is Tricia Morrissey, and she's the host of the Rooted in Starlight podcast. She's a talented and insightful astrologer with decades of experience. In this episode, she takes us for a deep dive into the astrological charts of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, taking us to the root of where it all began. Now let's get this conversation started. Tricia Morrissey, it is so delightful to have you with me this afternoon. I'm so excited. I've been listening to your podcast since the very first episode. Tell me a little bit about how you got into astrology and what drew you to that.
What drew me to astrology is it was actually something I was interested in as a teenager. That's when I started really gravitating towards it. And ego being what it is, the first thing I was fascinated with was me being a Leo and that being ruled by the sun and the ruby being the gemstone and just like all these things that just sounded so special about Leo. When I got into my later teens and early 20s, one of the things that I was finding was that I didn't feel like I was the Leo they were describing in the books. And I was like, how come I don't walk into a room and just kind of announce that I'm there and grab a microphone and make sure everyone's around me? That was when I started reading about the signs and the houses and how we come into this world with a blueprint or a map that really helps shape our personality and give us things that are basically what we call gifts and challenges with all the other planets and the moon and the way they operate within us. And so once I understood that, then I went into trying to do my own chart as the very first chart I'd ever done. That was when I started understanding like where my placements are with my Leo connections. They're not in a place where I'd be someone that would want to step on stage necessarily right away. Once I found all of that out, I was like, okay, this all makes sense. And then that just led me to want to observe people and then be like, oh, I wonder what else is going on in their chart. Like they think they're this, but they don't realize that there's probably other things that are impacting the way they react. It was probably in my mid-20s when I started taking courses and things like that. What I love about astrology is it is a topic that you never stop studying. I feel on some level because of that, it's helped me understand people in a way that I may not have normally coming from the background that I came from. And so it left me to be more open and curious about interactions and just watching people. I was always just a people watcher anyway. And so it always then leads me to watching how someone behaving and what's going on in the sky, and do they even know? Do they care? And then I built upon that. What was funny is with my work life, it's like I would get into a particular position, people would get to know me. And then once people got to know me, then I would share that I did astrology charts. And so then I used to do home parties where I would go to someone's house and they would have 3 or 4 people there where I had already done their charts, and I'd go and review them with them. And then from there, that was how I got into tarot, because one of the things when I was studying astrology is they were making a lot of connections with tarot. I was like, okay, I need to try and understand this system and why is it related to astrology? So that's basically how it all started. It's the one thing I've never been able to let go of. There's been a lot of changes. I've had some rough patches and I've had moments where I haven't spent every day knowing where the planets were or what the moon was doing. But overall, once I found it, it was just something I never walked away from where I thought, oh, I'm done with that. Oh, I don't care about this anymore. I came into this world with that as a language, and I was meant to learn how to develop that as my second language.
You do a real deep dive. It's not just like where you open a magazine or the newspaper and here's today's horoscope. It's not that at all. So we were talking, I have been following the Depp v. Heard trial with bated breath. I'm very much into the law and crime and all of this. And you said, well, I can do their charts. And I was like, well, you have to come on. I have to know. I want to know. How did you go about creating their charts? And I'm talking about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. He has a suit against her for $50 million. She's suing him for $100 million. It's just a mess. The whole thing, it's been going on since April, early April. When her birthday was in April, I looked that up. And it will be wrapping up in June, and his birthday is in June. So I'm like, oh, I wonder if that has anything to do with anything. So how did you go about looking up their charts?
I have a astrology software program that I use. There are several different types out there. And with all of those software programs, one of the things that comes with that are what they call global charts. And they would be charts of political figures, entertainment figures, anyone that gets pretty famous in the world or is holding high positions that you would know of. You can go into your software program and type in their name and their birth chart will come up. And so that's how I got Johnny Depp's. I know he's got to be in the database because he's an icon. What was interesting with Amber is I had to research hers because one of the things that we know across the astrology field is no one seems to know her birth time. The thing that changes with her chart is that means you don't know what her rising sign is. If someone comes to us and they say to us, oh, I want you to do my chart, but I have no idea when I was born. One of the things you're trying to do is get someone to try and at least get within 2 hours of their time for morning, afternoon, evening. If you can't do that, then the first thing that you do is you'll do the 6 a.m. time for the day of that person's birth. But what that does is it automatically puts their sun sign as the rising sign, and that may not necessarily be the case. But that's the general rule that you do when you don't have someone's time. I find it interesting that she's been in the entertainment field as long as she has. And I know from what I know just from the public news, like she did not have a great upbringing. So maybe that's why she doesn't know her birth time. I always get fascinated with that because then I wonder, I'm like, does someone not know it? Do they know it and they don't want to share it? Whenever someone tells me that they don't know their birth time, then I'm always like, was it during a time when nobody was really keeping records? Just because it usually is something that you're aware of. I mean, she's only in her 30s. Most adults, especially young adults, remember stories about their birth and their mom saying, oh, you were born at night or this or that or whatever. So that's where I thought it was interesting that we can't find a birth time for her. Johnny's was easy because it literally was there online. When I first pulled his chart, the first thing that I noticed was that he was a Leo rising. First thing I thought was, oh my God, no wonder he's an entertainer and an actor. That would be like so perfect to be a Leo rising and be someone that would be able to go out on the stage. His 10th house is Taurus, and he's got Mercury and Venus in Taurus. So Venus, that's her home. That's her natural home. And in Taurus, she loves the arts, and entertainment is part of the arts. So for that to be his 10th house, when I first looked at it, I was like, wow, that just totally explains how he ended up being an icon. He literally had this energy come into the world with him of, I need to be able to create. And that 10th house is the highest point in your chart. And so when you have planets there, they are normally the place that you would naturally want someone to develop them because they're going to be the easiest planets to work with because it's the highest point in your chart. Jupiter is in Aries and Mars just moved into Aries, and they're going to have a conjunction later on in the week, which is going to be a really important moment for a transit. But what was interesting is when I pulled his chart, I saw the Jupiter in Aries and I was like, wow, so he's having a Jupiter return because Jupiter only comes around every 12 years. So that's an important return in your chart. Wherever Jupiter is in your chart, that's where Jupiter wants you to grow and expand, and it wants to be able to help you without you having challenges or difficulties. And so when Jupiter comes back around to that sign, it takes 12 years for that to happen. Then that's the beginning of a new cycle. So when I saw that he had Jupiter in Aries, I was like, wow. I was like, this is a whole new cycle for him. And Jupiter does not like you being challenged. There was a moment where I was like, I wonder how this trial's going to end up just because of the way things are working out right now, timing for him. But the challenge that he has is that he has Saturn in his 7th house in Aquarius, which means he's also in the process of having a Saturn return. And Saturn returns are meant to be challenging because Saturn is the planet that wants to make sure that you learn lessons that you're meant to be learning here. And the Saturn returns only happen every 29 to 30 years. So literally our first Saturn return that we all had were between 29 and 30. For most of us, that's kind of when you really are like full-fledged moving into adulthood. You're out on your own. You're like, I've got everything I need. I've learned all the lessons I need to, and I'm out here ready to take on the world. And so it's interesting that that's the first time Saturn comes back around in your chart to almost test you to see, well, what have you learned? And do you really know how to respond versus react? And are you going to be able to build upon what it is you say you have as your foundation? And then it comes back around in that 59, 60 year mark. And so for him, when I saw that, I was like, oh, that could be interesting because you've got Jupiter on one hand wanting to say, oh, here I am, and I want to help you out in any way I can. And you have Saturn literally saying, not so fast. I need to make sure that I double check some things. Like Saturn's the one with the clipboard. Before you can kind of pass the gate of Saturn into the party, so to speak. It's like, oh, you got this? Okay. You know, the moment Saturn feels like you haven't grown in some way, then it's like, oh, well, here's this challenge. Let me bring this to you because this will help you develop and mature and learn in a way that you may not. So that was one of the things for him. I was like, wow, those are two big things to be going through during this trial. It's just kind of interesting. I wouldn't even want to say, oh, it's going to go this way or that way, just because as soon as I saw that he was both in a Jupiter return and a Saturn return, I was like, that's a tough one. The other piece, though, for Johnny Depp's chart that's interesting is that his Saturn is in the 7th house. The 7th house is all about relationships. For him, he literally came into this world where Saturn being in the 7th house literally said, this is where I will challenge you in relationships in your life. He's someone I followed over the years. And I've always been aware, like, who he's been dating, who he married, who he broke up with. And obviously the nature of their business can definitely create those kind of issues to begin with. But when I saw the 7th house Saturn, I was like, yeah. And then on top of that, you basically have Saturn saying, there's no rewards here unless you're going to put in the hard work and learn and grow from one relationship to another. I don't know that we can necessarily say that's happened when you look at some of the outcomes of what he's been involved in. One of the things, though, that I did look at, because I'm sure everyone's kind of like, oh, how those two even get together? Johnny, he's got Venus in Taurus and Mercury in Taurus in his 10th house, which means he knows how to relate to people. And as a 10th house, it would show how he's able to do that literally on an international basis. And for her, she's got Venus and the Sun both in Taurus. So as soon as I saw them both having the Venus in Taurus, I was like, oh, that was part of the connection. They're almost the stereotype of a relationship, and even more so the stereotype of the planet Venus. So as an astrologer, we always show the complexity of each planet because they're not just one thing. But obviously, one of the biggest things Venus is associated with is love. When you meet someone and you both have the same Venus in the same sign, that is going to have a potent attraction, regardless of whether or not anything else in the chart says, oh, this is a good idea for you two to get together. So that's one of the things that for them that I was just like, wow, that's really, really interesting. For her, the challenge with relationships that I saw is that she has Saturn in her 8th house. And one of the challenges with Saturn in your 8th house is being able to form successful, intimate relationships. That was the other piece that I thought that was really interesting is I was just like, wow, both of them have Saturn in a position where it's like they came into this world and Saturn almost said to them, I'm not going to be letting you move on unless you resolve issues that you have that need to be resolved. And so we're now seeing that play across the world stage with this trial.
And they both had troubled childhoods.
Yes. And addiction issues. Mm-hmm. So there's a codependency issue there, which that in itself would be an attraction. Now, what's interesting for Amber is because other than Venus being in Taurus, she also has the moon in Libra. And when the moon is in Libra, that is very much someone that loves being in love. If you take that moon and you couple it with a Venus Taurus, where Venus is at home and just loving being at home, it really speaks to someone that can go from relationship to relationship. And then that Saturn being in the 8th house, not being able to form the intimate bonds that are needed for relationships to be able to be successful and to be loving and matured. I know for me, in following the news, I remember when their breakup happened, where there was a moment for me where I just thought, I never thought they should have gotten together anyway. I just didn't feel the energy. There's a love there, but it's more that attraction. That, that Venus showing up and just being, and then never getting beyond that. So if you're never getting beyond that stage, it's not going to be a relationship that's going to last. But what's interesting too is that I remember with their breakup that it didn't surprise me. I didn't really feel as a couple that was going to last for any length of time. And with Amber, I just remembered that the next story I heard in the news was that then she was with Elon Musk. I remember when I saw that in the news, I was like, oh, there's something big going on there. If you're going from Johnny Depp to Elon Musk, I was like, okay, I was right that you two never should have been together. But that definitely means that there's, some challenges for her that, whether she's interested in addressing them or has, I don't know. I mean, with a trial like this, I'm not sure what or who is working on what. That's the thing that's interesting about that is you're trying to figure out not necessarily whose side is right, but whose side is coming out with the most reliable information. The other thing that's interesting about Amber's chart is Jupiter for her is in Pisces, which is where Jupiter has been since the beginning of this year. And then literally just moved into Aries a week ago. And then Jupiter's going to end up moving back into Pisces in October and spend the rest of the year in Pisces. And then it will move back into Aries. So what's interesting with this Pisces Aries dynamic too for them is that you really have Jupiter in Pisces. It's a sign that it rules, but in Pisces, it's very much that receptive, I am here to be idealistic about the kind of love that we can create. Whereas Jupiter in Aries, because it's in a fire sign there, it's very much that, okay, what do we need to do? Let's get this done. Where am I growing? And where am I moving? And let's do that. And so the biggest challenge you have sometimes with Jupiter and Aries is making sure you can ground the energy. And yet the biggest challenge you have with Jupiter and Pisces at sometimes is making sure that it doesn't get so idealistic that you're just out kind of in fantasy world. So that was the other piece of this, the timing of this. Their charts definitely have places where it said just the fact that they got together the timeline of it. And this is what I love about astrology, because this is where you can really track this. Like in my podcast, one of the things I like to talk about are the patterns. Jupiter's one of those patterns. It's like, what were you doing 12 years ago? Because whatever you were doing 12 years ago, that's one of the themes that's coming back around now that Jupiter is in Aries. And then you can do that with Saturn, because Saturn returned 29, 30 years. You can be like, okay, what was I working on? Did I do anything with that at a point where I was successful with it? Because that's going to be coming back around. So for any of us that are in late 50s, right there at that 60-year age mark, those are the things that you can really be looking at and saying, oh, I see this trajectory and I see what's happening here. But most people don't even dive that deep into this, what I call this blueprint. It's a compass for you. It's a blueprint for you. It's a map for you. And it really is something that shows that a decision you made in 2014 or 2015 is going to have an impact in 2018 or 2019 or 2021. And so that's one of the things that's really interesting about their chart, is that to look at them, you can see how they got together. You can see how they were not the best match to do that. And then you can now see from the way the planets are moving and how some of them are like literally in things where it's like planets come back around, where it's literally saying, and now this is a whole other level of what this relationship was when you made a decision 7 years ago or 8 years ago. That's one of the things for me that's really interesting, because the other piece of this that is fascinating, we've just got done these two major eclipses with the solar eclipse in Taurus and the lunar eclipse in Scorpio. And that was the other thing that I was looking at with their charts, because it's eclipse season and the North and South node are in Taurus and Scorpio. That's where you're going to need to learn how you can grow, what it is you need to let go of, because that South node in Scorpio is all about what is it that in order for your soul to evolve, we need you to let go of it. We need you to change the mindset that you have and be able to rebirth a new version of yourself, that the North node can take that energy and say, yes, this is the new start. This is the new beginning. So that was the other piece of it for me, because I thought for Johnny Depp, his Taurus is the 10th house. So that's the highest point in his chart. And so the North node is in his 10th house and the South node is in his 4th house in Scorpio. So that's where I was like, well, this should be interesting to see how that works for him, because the 4th house represents home and family. And it doesn't necessarily just mean that traditional home that you live in. It means that home that you create within yourself, so that whatever experience you're having in your life, that you can feel home. So most people can say, oh, I'm a beach person, or I'm a mountain person, or I'm this. Like, we can go out in nature and know where it is we feel very comfortable. That's one of those home pieces where you're able to create that. That's one of the things that's interesting for me, is that for him, Scorpio in his 4th house would be saying, what is it you need to be letting go of so that you can evolve and really ground yourself with this identity? And it would be an identity that would help enhance the gifts that he has, because this is one of the challenges for him too. Career-wise, it's not a win-win for either one of them right now. Both kind of losing work, and people are wondering how stable they are and who's going to be investing for them in the future.
Both of them feel the other one's disparaging comments and actions have destroyed their careers. So in their charts, do either of them have any indications that their careers will go on?
Quite frankly, I mean, for Johnny, I think he'll make out better just because of his status. I see in his chart that he's better off in that department, because career for him, his sun is in Gemini and it's in the 11th house. The 11th house is all about being able to send your message out into the world where it can be received with what we call the soul group. it's like you're able to connect, like your energy is able to fire off these pieces of energy where people are just able to feel that and gravitate to that. And so I feel for him with the way his chart is set up, with having the strong Taurus and having both Venus and Mercury in Taurus in the 10th house, and then his sun in the 11th, that there is this element of he will be able to rebuild. The North Node in Taurus would want to help him rebuild and help him be able to grow and evolve. His challenge is going to be being able to feel like he has evolved into a person that possibly the next relationship he gets into would be something more solid and healthy, because that's probably the biggest challenge for them, is that neither one of them on the relationship level were healthy when they got involved. And so it's like these two unhealthy people that got together and their intentions were good, but intentions only take you so far. If you don't put in the work and if you don't put in the energy to make something solid, then an intention is going to just fade away. And that's literally what you just saw happen in that relationship. And now you're really seeing the toxicity level of it as well. For Amber, what is interesting is she's got Jupiter in Pisces in her 11th house. And at some point this year, Jupiter's going to be moving back into Pisces for a few months before it comes back into Aries. Based on what we have that we're using as a birth time for her, we're saying that her North Node is in her first house and her South Node is in her 7th house. What's interesting for that is the South Node itself wants to be able to help us learn how to let go of things. She has Pluto in her 7th house, and Pluto walks into a sign in your chart in a particular house and says, what do we need to get rid of here? Oh, everything? Okay, not a problem. Don't worry. All those ashes there, that's going to rebirth into something else. So don't mind what I'm doing here. And so Pluto literally wants to pare everything down before it will allow a rebirth or a renewal to happen. So that whole Phoenix being associated with Scorpio, that's part of why that is because the way Pluto operates, it's like, well, what is it that I need to deconstruct for you in order to construct? And so for her right now, she's got the South Node in the 7th house saying, oh, what is it we need to get rid of so that we can make sure that whatever you work on, it's going to be something that will be really good for you and help you evolve, help your soul and spirit evolve. And then you have Pluto there saying basically, oh, I'm here. I'll help out too. No problem. So I feel that she's going to have more challenges in the rebuilding than Johnny is. That's a combination of the charts and even just where each one of them is in their careers. Because Amber, while well known, is not an icon the way Johnny Depp is. One of the things we really love about our icons is we sometimes love seeing how human they are and then wanting to be able to support them to get back where they were, knowing that the only thing the public will ask from him is, what did you learn from this? And so if he's able to go out there and share that, then he's got a whole second half of life that would actually really work for him. His challenge is that the other piece of the Taurus information is that you have Uranus, which is the planet of revolution and the planet of rebellion. That's in Taurus. The challenge with that is that with the North Node being in there, with these eclipses that are happening, you had April, May, we're going to have 2 more in October and November. And so you're in spaces where Uranus, if it's working with any of that, can just sometimes come in and just blow something up, and you're just kind of like, whoa, wait, what was that? On a positive level, it can be something where something can fall into your lap and a door can open. So I think for him, because he's got Venus and Mercury both in Taurus and they work well together, and the North Node being there, he has the better opportunity of those things kind of working out for him. I think, though, like you said, it's really interesting that they're saying that this trial is expected to be over in June, which is literally the start of a new solar new year for him, because his birthday being June 9th, he gets to kick that off. He's going to have a solar return right at the end of this. And I feel like that's where for him, he's going to be able to use his voice to be expressing what he's been through. I definitely feel that you'll see this play out in some of the work projects that he may end up taking down the line. I think your biggest challenge with Amber, and it's difficult because neither one of them came from great backgrounds, and then they both had substance abuse issues, which was their way of dealing with the childhoods that they had. But using the time that we're using for her and giving Taurus that first house, her challenge with the North Node being there and the Sun being there and Venus being there is this element of feeling entitled, of having this ability that she'll go into a relationship and what she expects is what she expects, because Taurus is very stubborn. So Taurus is not in that space of, oh yeah, okay, no problem. We're changing this all up. No problem. It's like she goes into these relationships with, here's what I want. And then if that doesn't measure up to what she ends up getting, then obviously we're seeing certainly one of the ways that's playing out on the world stage and that's one of the things that I think is going to be interesting with her is the South Node in Scorpio in her 7th house would want that kind of image of yourself to be able to change so that you can evolve into a place where you can do the give and take more easily in a relationship. I think that's going to be challenging because for Taurus and Scorpio, they're both fixed signs. So they're not signs that want to give in. They know how to kind of hold their ground. It'll be interesting to see if this will actually be the end of it or if there will be something else that comes along because you have Mercury retrograde right now. I remember when they were saying the June, I don't know if they've actually given a date, but all I was thinking was I was like, well, I'm hoping that this doesn't officially end until after Mercury goes direct, because I really could see Mercury being retrograde and a decision coming in and then something happening that just totally flips that on its head. I could totally see something like that happening.
And what is that date?
Mercury goes direct on June 3rd. This last week of May into that first week of June is where things can get really kind of dicey again, where you can have a lot of miscommunication and things you thought were one way. You're going to find out a week later that they're not. I think the jury's going to have it for a little bit. I don't think that this is going to be a few hours later, them coming out, because there's just really been a lot of information that has come through this. There was some stuff that when I heard it, I was like, okay, this doesn't surprise me. And then there were other things where they were coming out. I was like, oh, okay, wait a minute. This is like a whole new story here, a whole new piece of information that you didn't realize. I'm not someone that would bet on this, but in looking at their charts, I just feel that Johnny's got not the easier chart in the sense that he's just going to win at everything because he does it. That 7th house Saturn is not something that really works for him. In his first house, he literally has Uranus, Mars, and Pluto all in his first house, all in Virgo. Those are things that really speak to someone that has certainly had to work hard to create an identity for themselves. And I think now what's going on is he's being challenged with the Saturn return, saying how truthful is that identity and how solid is that identity.
I have a question about that. Do either of their charts indicate if they're prone to being honest, dishonest? Do they exaggerate?
So in Amber's chart, one of the things that's interesting is in her chart, you've got Jupiter in Pisces. Like I said, Jupiter in Pisces is one of those where if you are someone that is really working on yourself and You know where you've come from. You know how that shaped you, and you've made the decision this was helpful or it wasn't. And so I need to do ABC. Then Jupiter in Pisces can really lend to you being someone that can heal yourself in some of the deepest ways. If you are not, then Jupiter in Pisces, that's almost where someone would point to that. There's other things obviously in her chart, but that Jupiter in Pisces is one of the things that you would point to and say, this is where the self-medicating came from. This is where the being prone to addiction and codependency came from, because that's at the lowest spectrum of Pisces. Jupiter in Pisces would be that. It would be the planet where you overindulge, where you take upon yourself as the victim of life. And so therefore, everything's happening to you. And with her having Venus in Taurus, in those moments where you're feeling that things are unfair, then the way that you're going to act out is either act out against someone or internalize that behavior and do things that are harmful for yourself. Her Libra moon is another place where, again, Libra is the sign that likes to be in love. So as long as it's in love, it feels good. When it's not in love, then it can get inside its head of, well, what's wrong here? Is it me? Is it them? And then depending on those other placements that you're going to have, and for her having that Pluto in the 7th house, it would be easy for her to blame others, like to be able to look outside of herself and say, well, it's their fault. You know, I came into this relationship wanting this, and they didn't give me that. And so that makes them the bad person. And people should see that. People should easily see that. That's one of the challenges that I feel that she has. One of the things that's interesting for Johnny is that the sun in Gemini is a place where you're able to be very social. But because he's got his Mercury in Taurus, the biggest challenge with it is that it will sometimes challenge those beliefs for you. But because Taurus can be so stubborn, you can be someone that's like, well, no, I'm sticking to my guns no matter what. And you can say it's day, but I told you it was night. And so I'm not changing my mind. So that can be a challenge for him. His chart is set up in a way where he has more capability of self-undoing, and Amber's chart is set up where you see more capability of the kind of the infliction on others. That her energy, based on what we're using here, because we don't have an actual birth time for her, her energy in her chart is one of, I'm out there in the world seeking what I want. And if I don't get that, then that's a wound to me. And then it becomes, how does she want to respond to that wound? You know, is it going to be where you're going to say, oh, I've learned from that and I've evolved and I've grown? Or are you going to say, you've hurt me and I'm coming back at you for that? Because the other piece with Libra is ruled by Venus, but Libra is also the sign of legal issues. Her moon being in Libra, like you could see it being the kind of thing where, oh, I love to be in love, but if I can't be in love, then I'm going to hurt you. In some legal way. I'm going to find a way to get back at you because I wanted to just be in love and have you give me everything that I wanted. That's one of the things about that Libra moon that's really interesting, is that it's like she literally had, between this Venus in Taurus and then the moon being in Libra, she really has this energy of wanting to be taken care of the way Venus would. I mean, Venus does, as a planet and as a goddess, expect that. And so when that doesn't happen, then it's like, how do you want to respond to that? And so the Libra moon for her very much has that legality issue of what is it you're going to do to let someone know that they didn't provide for you what you wanted from them.
Fascinating. Absolutely, positively fascinating. Trisha, thank you so much. I mean, that was a deep dive. Wow. Trisha has such great insight, and her analysis of their charts, their roadmap that they were given by the stars explains so much. I love that we can look to the stars for guidance. I don't know about you, but I'm eager to find out what my astrological birth chart reveals. Check the show notes below to see where you can find Trisha and how you can get your astrological birth chart. You can listen to her weekly on her podcast, Rooted in Starlight. Until next time, have a wonderful week.